Hi everybody, it's Franny and we're back with our friend's 1969 Volkswagen Beetle. Today's project is going to be to get the axles back in the car and also to do the final work on the brakes. So that's bleeding and adjusting. So in the last video I talked about the CV joints a bit and I did pull them all apart, but the balls were pitted, the runs were pretty worn out. So it just made sense to replace the entire axle. Now I think with these are all pre-assembled here. So this is nice. They've already got the boots on obviously and they've got a little cap off the end. You can kind of see it's all black in there. That's the grease. But I don't think that's going to be enough. We're going to have to fill the cup that these things go into on both sides with a bit of grease. So I've got a tube of actual CV joint grease. It says moly disulfide grease. This is a pretty specific grease for CV joints. So I think if you're going to do this, you're probably going to need to get at least a tube of this to fill the little cavities. Maybe two. We'll see how far this goes. Installing the axles should be pretty straightforward, so let's get to it. I'm going to start by installing our axle on the inboard side, so on the transmission side. Now, they've got these covers over here, so we'll go ahead and take them off one at a time. So before we get to installing this, I want to mention also that I've completely cleaned all of the hardware. So it can be a little bit difficult installing these things. It sounds pretty simple. You just sort of fill the cavity with grease and plop them in. But actually the mating surface where the bolts go, so that's up here, this surface here, needs to be absolutely clean. And there's a reason for that. The CV joints are designed specifically to deliver torque, right? So we have torque delivering from the transmission out to the wheel hub. That's their job, is to deliver torque. But exactly how do they do that? Well, you might think at first that these bolts are actually delivering the torque, but the truth of the matter is they'll shear right off. They can't handle the torque in shear. They'll just cut right off. So the torque is actually applied through the outer rim here through friction onto the mating surface. So either one of these two cup plates here. And that's the way it's done. And that's why they have to be very, very clean. It's kind of a weird thing. We're going to have a bunch of grease in the center and the outside has to be absolutely clean. So we just have to be kind of careful about that. Now I also have a bungee cord here. That's to hold the axle on the outside so it's not just sort of flopping down. It'll just make life a little bit easier for us. Now our axle is symmetric, so it doesn't really matter which side goes on the inside. Now this is a good time to don your safety glasses since you're under the car and grease can kind of go anywhere. And we want to be kind of careful with this stuff. It's yuck. So before we get started, I'm going to fill this cavity with grease here. And this just becomes a reservoir. So we're going to pull this cover off. Try and keep as much grease as possible in the actual CV joint. There's a bunch of it sticking to it. Now it's this edge around here that we also want clean. So, and try to keep it out of the holes as well. It's just one of these things. It's kind of a pain. It's kind of weird. It's more goopy work. And to clean the bolt holes out, just use a little Q-tip action here. You just don't want any grease in these holes either. I know that sounds funny, but the bolts are designed to go in dry, not greased. And so these holes really need to be clean so when you put the bolt through, you don't get a bunch of goop all over them. Okay, well I think I've got the holes all cleaned out and I'm just gonna go around here and try to get this outside edge pretty clean, grease-free-ish. It's awfully difficult. You're working in such close proximity to clean and greasy. So, is what it is. And don't forget your little plate here as well. We can push that through here while we've kind of got a good eye on it. And if you do have any residual grease on your bolt when you push it through, which it's almost impossible not to, go ahead and clean it off, a little brake clean, just to get it as dry as possible. Slip our tool on there. Hoist this guy up. And now I'm going to pull my bungee cord around the axle to help hold it up. There we go. Now I've got a new tool I want to try out. I saw this advertised somewhere. It looks like a standard ratchet, but it's actually a rotatey-ratchet. Isn't that cool? So you rotate this guy and notice as you go back and forth, it continues in the same direction. So that's pretty sweet. And you can just change the direction here by the little switch in the back. Turn it over the other direction, and boom, back and forth and back and forth. So I think this is gonna be super cool for tight areas where you don't have a lot of room to move back and forth. I think this is gonna be pretty sweet. So let's see how it works. Oh, isn't that cool? How cool is that? Oh, that's super neat. Well, that's awesome. Sitting up in there going like this is just killer. This thing is awesome. This is really fun. All right, let's get the rest of our bolts in. With the CV joint mounted on the inboard side, let's get to the outboard side. It's just the same thing. We're gonna pull the cover off, clean it, and install it. With all of our bolts cinched down, our next step is to torque them. Now the torque value is 25 foot-pounds, so not a huge amount. But in this case, I have the wheel off the ground. In fact, I have the wheel off the hub here, so it's just free to turn by itself. And there's a couple of options at this point. I could use the trick before I used to set the brakes on this thing, and that would lock this hub and that would lock both sides of the shaft. That will work. You could also use a strap wrench on it here, and you could hold onto it and torque it one way. That's a pretty good way to go as well. Well, I think the method I'm going to use is to lock the hub down with the brake adjusters in the back here. I think that's probably going to be the easiest. There we go. All right, want to make sure our tool's seated all the way. There we go, 25. Get the one on the other side here that we can get to, which is actually the one at the top. There we go, 25 foot-pounds. Now a great idea after you've torqued one of these bolts, because it's gonna be really hard to know which one you torqued and kind of hard to remember, is to put a little dab of color on them. That way you'll know and it'll signal that you've already torqued that one. All right, so I'm just gonna put a little bit there, and then also on the one at the top here that we've already done, up here. Okay. And the rest are just the same. We're gonna loosen it up, rotate it around. With each 6 done on each side, I'm going to loosen this up and rotate it around, make sure I didn't miss one. All right, that looks great. Well, that's our new axle installed and torqued down. So now all I have to do is just do the other side. now that we have both of our axles in and everything is torqued down, the next thing I want to do is finally get to adjusting the brakes. We're finally at that point. Woo! All right, so these brakes have kind of a strange adjustment if you've never worked on a Volkswagen before, but if you have, this is standard play. The first thing to do is to disengage the parking brake if it's on. That will mess up our measurements, so make sure that that's all the way down. Well, looking in our two adjustment holes here, we can see our stars. That's great. We've been using these to set this wheel so that it won't spin, but what we're going to do is actually set this up properly. Now, the thing this gets confusing. It's like, which way do you turn this thing? Well, how does it make it tighter? How does it make it looser? You can kind of see the threads in there, but as you rotate this guy, it's going to screw into our pin here, and that's going to loosen our brake. So if we want to tighten our brake, we want to sort of screw our star out of that adjuster there. Same deal on the other side, but because these guys are mirror images of each other, in order to tighten, we're going to be moving this one down like this, and we'll move this one up like that. It's a little strange, but you'll get used to it after a while. If you get confused, just kind of think about the threads and think about what you're trying to do. Oh, it's too tight. Okay, so I need to screw this guy in to pull this adjuster pin into the center here, and that will loosen our brake. All right, so here's what we want to do. We want to check our brake, make sure it's spinning just fine. Good, yay. All right, now what we want to do is tighten them up until we feel some drag. So for this one, we're going to be loosening it. That means pulling down from the top here. All right, now will it spin? No, it won't. Okay, well that's too tight. We'll loosen this back up. There, we've got a little bit of movement there. That feels pretty good. Any more, and I believe we're just too tight. You don't want your shoes to drag here, so loosen them up until it feels free. Still feels a little bit tight. Maybe one more. Yeah, see, now that feels good. And then I like to loosen them maybe one more click after that. There we go. On the right side, it's going to be the opposite. So we want to loosen this guy up again, which means we're going to be rotating our stars up. All right, that feels like it's sort of starting to stop. Yeah, I can feel it starting to drag a little bit. We can be sure. Maybe one more, and yeah, it's getting pretty tight. All right, so and that's probably, yeah, very hard to move. Okay, great. So now let's loosen this back up until it still moves freely. That feels good. If we go too far, yep, we start to drag. All right, and then one more for good measure. All right, that feels pretty good. Now these holes here should have a plug in them that looks like this. This car didn't have any of them, so I ordered a full set of them. If they're a little bit difficult to get on, I like to use a little bit of silicone paste just to lubricate them a little bit, and then they'll pop right in. The other two holes here are inspection ports for your brake pads, so you can get an idea of just how much meat you've got on there. So looking at this, obviously these pads are brand new, so we've got quite a bit here. So that's all these holes are for, and they should have covers on them as well. And that's it for adjusting the brakes on one of these cars. Actually pretty simple, huh? All right, well let me get to the rest of the wheels, and then we'll get on to the bleeding. For the front wheel, we've got the wheel just barely off the ground. I have the jack stand and the jack both supporting this. It's not too scary because it's only about an inch off the ground. All right, so we can freely spin our wheel. That's what we need. Now, the adjustments on the front wheels are a bit different. They're on the side here in the front. So the problem is that access is a little bit difficult up here. It's just tight. But other than that, it's the same as the rear wheels. I think we're going to try a little smaller screwdriver because you've got the shock in the way here and the suspension bits, and using a long screwdriver, there's just not much room there. So a smaller one I think works better. Now if your stars are fairly frozen, this is going to be pretty difficult to do. And if they won't move at all, then you're going to have to pull your drum off and service those stars. There's really just no other way to do it. And that's the adjustment on the front wheel. The other side is the same, so I won't bore you with that. Next, let's get to bleeding these brakes. Well, our first step in this process is going to be to fill up our reservoir. Remember, we've had everything pretty much out. New cylinders, new soft lines, all sorts of stuff. So we are really low on fluid. So our little reservoir is over here. And this is a brand new bottle of brake fluid here. You always want to use a new bottle. This stuff is hydrophilic, so it will suck in moisture from the atmosphere, and that's not what you want in your brake system. Sometimes these reservoirs will have a little sort of a screen in here, just sort of a crap filter. You want to pull that out first. And also, these are dual chamber reservoirs, so make sure you get fluid in both chambers. Remember, brake fluid, really bad for paint, so you don't want to get this on your paint. Make sure you have rags at the ready just in case something goes bad. All right, so we'll just fill this up a little bit. At this point, we're ready to start bleeding the brakes. I'm going to start with the wheel that's the furthest away from the master cylinder, which is the right rear wheel. And I have my assistant Marcel. You remember Marcel from the Lambo video. Pretty sweet. Marcel, say hi to everyone.
Hi everyone.
All right, he's going to be giving me a hand today. He's going to be pumping away. All right, let's reconvene at the back right wheel and we'll get started. Here's the plan. We're going to have Marcel pump, pump, hold. I'm going to open the bleeder, let out the air, close it back up, pump, pump, hold, open the bleeder, and we're going to continue to do that until we get a steady stream of fluid and no air bubbles. And this can take a bit, so it's going to take several tries. And like I said, we have a ton of air in the system. Well, I think we're all set at this end. We've got our catch can all set up here, down here. So we're all set. Marcel, pump, pump, hold.
All right.
Yeah, there goes. Oh, there's the air coming out. Wonderful. Okay, we're just going to continue on. So please continue. That's a good sign. Oh boy, look at all that air. Okay, again. All right. Yep, look at all that air. And I can feel the shoes actually moving inside the drum, so that's a good thing. All right, again, please.
All right.
There we go. We're getting lots of air this way. It's great. Again, please. Well, that's looking better. Less air, more fluid. Very good. Okay, continue, please. Yeah, we're still getting a little bit of air bubbles. That's to be expected, but looks much better. So again, please. Yep, see, these still got some air bubbles there. So, all right, again, please.
Eventually.
Okay, we can see that the last couple of times, no air bubbles at all. Looks really, really good. We'll go one more time, please.
Here we go.
Yeah, that looks great. All right, so we'll lock this off. We can remove our tube here. Now another thing is to look at the color of this fluid. It's pretty terrible. It's pretty brown, what was coming out of it. Now we've actually pumped a decent amount of fluid through, but it's really pretty dark. Before I go any further, I want to go back and check on the reservoir and make sure that we haven't gone down too far, because we have pumped out a little bit of fluid here. You never want your reservoir to go dry. So let me go double check that really quick, and we'll top off the reservoir and maybe pull a little more fluid through, because I don't think the fluid in these brakes has been changed jeepers anytime soon. So, all right, I'll be right back. Well, I've topped off the fluid in the reservoir, and I think we're good to continue on a little bit. I just want to get a bit more of that fluid out. I think we're looking pretty good air-wise, but I just want to push a little more fluid through. And our fluid is looking quite a bit cleaner, I think, in the tube, so I think we're good here, actually. I'm going to move over and do the rear left wheel, then the front right, then the front left. So I'm not going to bore you with all of that. It's basically the same process. You just kind of pump, hold, and open the bleeder, let the air out, and then we're going to throw some fluid through. If you are doing this, once again, be very careful not to let your reservoir go dry. That's really a pretty bad thing. You get air in your master cylinder, and that's really kind of a bad thing. So just kind of double check. Every time you do one of the wheels, go back, double check your reservoir, and remember that reservoir has two sections to it, and it'll have a divider in between it. So if you're looking at one of them and it looks like it's totally full, make sure that you look at the other one as well. The Beetles are set up with a forward and rear circuit, so you'll see one of those levels start to drop, and the other one will be fine. And then when you do the fronts, it'll do the opposite. The other one will start to drop. So just kind of be aware of that. And when you're all done, you want to remember to replace the little dust cover that goes over the bleeder here. Keep that guy as clean as possible. So I'm going to go through and do the rest of the wheels and report back. Hopefully we have a nice hard brake pedal when we're done. And our last step is to double check our reservoir. Now I had been filling this up a little bit past the max line here just because I knew we were going to be pulling a lot of fluid out. And turns out that the level is actually pretty much perfect. It's right where it should be. It's a little hard to see, but we can see it sort of sloshing there a little bit. It's right at this line here, the seam for the top, which I think is where it's supposed to be actually. All right, well, we're all good here. We have our brakes adjusted and bled, so that's pretty sweet. Well, okay, we got a lot of work done on the car today, huh? Feeling pretty good about it. We got our new axles in, we got our brakes adjusted and bled, and boy was that fluid dirty, so very much needed to be bled. All right, well, I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, please give it a thumbs up. Questions or comments, go ahead and leave them down below and I'll get right to them. So we still have a lot more to go on the Beetle, so if you haven't subscribed to the channel, go ahead and do so now. Hit the little bell next to it to be notified, because you're not going to want to miss any of this content. And then we are getting back to the 911 very shortly. Oh, look at that, the wheel's back on. So on this car, I'd love to take it out for a test drive at this point, but the transmission fluid level is low, and there's a few other things I want to do before I actually put the car on the road. So those will be the videos coming up on this car. Well, all right, thank you so much for watching, and as always, a very special thank you to our Patreon supporters. Until next time, safe travels. Bye.